Dead Mile. Night drives used to be my escape. The road, the hum of the engine, the way the world seemed to shrink to just my headlights cutting through the dark. It was comforting, safe even. That night, I learned how wrong I was. Started as an ordinary drive. I was heading back home from a late shift at work, exhausted but eager to be in my own bed. The highway was mostly empty, just the occasional truck passing by. I took a sip of my gas station coffee, grimacing at the bitterness, but I needed it to stay awake. Then I saw the detour sign. Bright orange, reflective letters. Detour, road closed ahead. I frowned. This stretch of highway had never been closed before. But sure enough, a row of barricades blocked the road a mile ahead. My GPS rerouted me onto a side road, one I had never taken before. I hesitated. Something about the road felt wrong. The asphalt looked cracked, like no one had driven on it for years. The trees lining the sides seemed taller, denser. But I was tired. I just wanted to get home, so I took the turn. The road that wouldn't end. The detour started out fine. A little narrow, but nothing unusual. My GPS estimated it would add about 20 minutes to my trip. Not great, but not the worst thing either. The first 10 minutes passed uneventfully. The road twisted through the countryside, winding through thick woods. My high beams barely cut through the darkness, the trees swallowing up the light. Then I noticed something. The mile marker on the side of the road. Mile 77. That was strange. This wasn't a highway. Why would there be mile markers? I shook it off and kept driving. A few minutes later, I saw another one. Mile 77. I blinked. That couldn't be right. I had been driving for at least 5 minutes since the last one. I checked my speedometer, still going 60 miles per hour. I should have passed another mile marker by now. But there it was again. Mile 77. A chill crawled up my spine. I pressed harder on the gas. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless. My headlights illuminated the cracked pavement, the trees looming on either side like silent sentinels. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the road. My breath caught in my throat. A woman. She was barefoot, wearing a thin white dress, her long hair hanging over her face. Her skin was pale, too pale. As I sped past, I risked a glance in my rearview mirror. She was gone. I exhaled sharply, my heart hammering in my chest. Just my imagination. Just exhaustion playing tricks on me. But then, mile 77. Again. I slammed the brakes. My tires screeched against the pavement, my heart thudding in my ears. I was not imagining this. I glanced at my GPS. The map was frozen. My location dot hovering over a blank stretch of road. No street names, no landmarks, just emptiness. The air in the car felt thick, heavy. I turned the radio on to break the silence. Static. I adjusted the dial. More static. Then, beneath the static, a whisper, soft, garbled. Turn back. I switched the radio off. My hands were slick with sweat. I needed to get off this road. I threw the car into reverse, spinning the wheel to make a U-turn. The tires skidded, the car jerking as I turned around. My headlights swept across the trees, illuminating. A figure standing in the middle of the road. The woman. She was closer now. Too close. I gasped, slamming the brakes. My breath came in ragged bursts, my pulse hammering against my ribs. She tilted her head. I couldn't see her eyes. I didn't want to. Then slowly she smiled. Not a normal smile. Too wide, too stretched, like her skin barely fit her skull. I threw the car into drive and floored the gas pedal. She didn't move. At the last second, I swerved. My tires screeched as I veered around her, barely missing her. The car fishtailed, but I kept control, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I didn't look back. I just kept driving. The endless road. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I wasn't sure anymore. The trees blurred together. The road stretched ahead, empty and unchanging. My gas gauge was dropping, but the mile markers never did. Mile 77. Always mile 77. The silence in the car was deafening. Then the knocking started. Soft at first, barely audible over the roar of the engine. Then louder. Knock, knock, knock. I glanced at the passenger side window. A handprint, pressed against the glass. I nearly lost control of the car. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe. Then my headlights flickered, and for a split second, she was in the back seat. I screamed. The car swerved violently. My hands yanked the wheel, tires screeching against the asphalt. Then, the road disappeared. I was weightless. The car plummeted. Darkness swallowed everything. The other side. I woke up to silence. No car. No road. Just nothing. I stood, my body aching. The air was thick, suffocating. A pale light stretched endlessly in every direction. The ground beneath me wasn't asphalt. It wasn't anything. Then I saw them. Figures in the distance. Hundreds of them. Motionless. Staring. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't obey. Then I felt it. A cold breath against my neck. A whisper. You shouldn't have come this way. I turned. She was there, smiling. And then, darkness. Epilogue. They found my car 2 days later. Crashed into a ravine, engine still running. The driver's seat was empty. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Just a single handprint on the passenger side window. And the odometer? It was frozen. Mile 77. Dead end. Night drives have always been my escape. There's something about the open road, the hum of the engine, and the endless stretch of highway that helps me clear my mind. No distractions, no responsibilities, just me and the road. But some roads aren't meant to be traveled at night. It was a little past midnight when I left my friend's house on the outskirts of town. The highway back home was a straight shot, but I was in no rush, so I decided to take the scenic route. A quiet, winding road through the countryside, lined with tall trees and barely any traffic. I'd driven it a few times before, and it had a strange beauty at night. Lonely yet peaceful. The first hour passed uneventfully. The occasional streetlight cast long shadows across the pavement, and the trees swayed in the cool night breeze. My high beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the endless stretch ahead. Then I saw the sign. Detour ahead, road closed. That was strange. I didn't remember any construction around here. But sure enough, as I rounded a bend, I saw orange barricades blocking the road. My GPS beeped, rerouting me onto a side road I had never noticed before. I hesitated. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars, with dense woods pressing in on both sides. There were no streetlights, just an empty stretch of asphalt disappearing into darkness. I checked my phone. No signal. With a sigh, I took the turn. First, it seemed fine. The road was smooth, and though the trees were thicker, I assumed it would eventually reconnect with the main highway. My headlights revealed glimpses of abandoned farmhouses, their broken windows reflecting the dim glow before vanishing into the night. The air felt heavy, like the quiet was pressing down on me. Minutes passed, then an hour. The road should have led me back by now. I checked my GPS again. The blue dot on the screen was floating in empty space, as if the road didn't exist. That's when I saw it. A figure standing on the side of the road. I nearly slammed the brakes. It was a woman. She was barefoot, wearing a tattered dress, her long hair covering most of her face. Her posture was unnatural, head tilted at an odd angle, her arms hanging limply at her sides. She didn't move. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening on the wheel. My headlights cast long shadows behind her, stretching into the woods like dark fingers. A voice in my head screamed at me to keep driving. But then, she took a step forward. Not a normal step. A slow, dragging motion, like her legs weren't working right. My pulse pounded. Another step. Then another. I didn't wait. I floored the gas pedal. The car roared forward, leaving the woman behind in the rearview mirror. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, my hands shaking against the wheel. But as I sped ahead, something wasn't right. The trees were getting denser, their twisted branches reaching toward the road like skeletal hands. My headlights flickered. The darkness ahead seemed deeper, and then I saw her again. standing in the middle of the road. Impossible. I had left her behind miles ago. I swerved, barely avoiding her. My tires skidded against the asphalt, and I gritted my teeth, gripping the wheel as I corrected my course. My heart was a hammer in my chest. I pressed harder on the gas, but no matter how far I drove, the road didn't end. Mile after mile, the same stretch of trees, the same suffocating darkness. The odometer ticked forward, but I wasn't getting anywhere. Then the radio crackled to life. A low whisper. I didn't turn it on. "You shouldn't be here." A chill crawled up my spine. The voice was soft, almost familiar. I reached for the dial, but the static grew louder, warping into something else. Laughter. Not normal laughter. It was distorted, too high-pitched, like someone playing a recording at the wrong speed. My breath hitched, and then up ahead, headlights. Relief flooded through me. Another car. I flashed my high beams, honking the horn. Maybe they could tell me how to get back to the highway. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. It was my car. Same make, same model. Same dent on the front bumper from when I hit a deer last year. And then I saw the driver. Me. I stared at myself, gripping the wheel of the other car, eyes wide and unblinking. My doppelganger. I screamed. The other me tilted his head, a slow, unnatural movement. Then he smiled, a sick, twisted grin, and suddenly his headlights shut off. Darkness swallowed everything. My car stalled. The engine sputtered, then died. The dashboard lights flickered and went out. The radio fell silent. I was trapped. The silence was deafening. Then, a knock on my window. Slow, rhythmic. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The knocking grew louder. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the car roared back to life. The headlights flickered on. The road ahead was clear. No other car, no figure, no woman. I didn't question it. I hit the gas and sped forward. The trees thinned, the darkness lifted, and then I was back on the main road. The Dieter sign was gone. The sky was lighter, the first hints of dawn peeking over the horizon. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I made it home just as the sun rose. But when I stepped out of my car, my blood ran cold. There were handprints on my windows, dozens of them, smudged, overlapping, too many to belong to just one person. Some of them were mine. I never took that road again. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right, I swear I hear knocking. The road that never ends. Night drives used to be my escape. The hum of the engine, the rhythmic flashing of the lane dividers, the feeling of being alone with my thoughts. It was my way of unwinding. But some roads aren't meant to be traveled at night. Some roads take more than they give. I learned that the hard way. It started like any other late-night drive. I had just finished visiting my parents in a small town 3 hours away, and I decided to take the back roads home. I had driven this route a dozen times before, and I loved how quiet it was. Just me, my car, and the open road. The first hour was uneventful. A few distant headlights passed every now and then, but for the most part, I was alone. The stars above were hidden behind thick clouds, and the trees lining the road swayed gently in the wind. Then I saw the Dieter sign, bright orange, reflecting in my headlights. Dieter, road closed ahead. That didn't make sense. This road never had closures. There weren't even any major intersections nearby. Still, I wasn't about to argue with roadwork, so I followed the Dieter sign onto an unfamiliar road. It was narrower, the trees closer to the pavement, their twisted branches forming a tunnel overhead. My GPS recalculated, showing an alternate route that would add an extra 20 minutes to my trip. Not ideal, but not the worst thing either. I drove on. The farther I went, the darker it got. The road was winding, curving sharply at odd angles. The trees on either side grew denser, blocking out the sky completely. My headlights barely cut through the thick darkness. A sinking feeling settled in my chest. I checked my phone. No signal. I glanced at the dashboard. My gas gauge showed half a tank, plenty to get home. But then I saw it. A mile marker. Mile 237. I frowned. That didn't make sense. Mile markers didn't exist on this road. I had never seen them here before, but maybe it was just some backroad numbering system I wasn't familiar with. I shook it off and kept driving. Then, a few minutes later, I saw another one. Mile 237. I slowed down. My pulse quickened. I had just passed this exact mile marker. I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was the same weathered post, the same slight lean to the left. My stomach twisted. I kept driving, pushing a little harder on the gas. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was just tired. But then, 10 minutes later, another mile marker. Mile 237. My fingers clenched the wheel. I was driving in a straight line. There had been no turns, no loops. And yet, I was back at the same spot. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I kept going, heart pounding. The road stretched ahead, endless and dark. My headlights barely touched the blacktop before being swallowed by the void beyond. Then I saw something in my rearview mirror. At first, it was just a shape, a flicker in the darkness. A shadow, standing at the edge of the road. I slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, tires screeching against the asphalt. I twisted around in my seat, breath catching in my throat. Nothing. The road was empty. The trees stood silent, unmoving. I took a shaky breath and faced forward again. And that's when I saw it. Someone was standing in the middle of the road. I gasped, my blood running ice cold. A man, motionless, staring directly at me. His face was pale, almost sickly, his clothes ragged and torn. His eyes, God, his eyes. They were empty, not just dark, hollow, like looking into something that wasn't meant to exist. I hit the horn. No reaction. I inched the car forward, my breath hitching in my throat. He didn't move, didn't flinch. Then, as my headlights fully illuminated him, I saw something else. His feet weren't touching the ground. My stomach dropped. I jammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed away. The man remained still, watching me, his hollow eyes locked onto mine. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished. I slammed the brakes again, my heart pounding. My hands were slick with sweat, my breaths coming in short, panicked bursts. I needed to get out of here. I turned back onto the road and floored the gas pedal. The car roared forward, cutting through the night like a bullet. My only focus was getting back to the main road, getting away from whatever this was. But then, mile 237, my breath caught in my throat. No. I was still here. I had been driving for nearly an hour, and I was still in the same place. I pressed harder on the gas. The car sped up, but the road stretched endlessly ahead. The trees blurred past, shadows twisting and shifting. My headlights flickered. The radio crackled with static, though it had been off the whole time. Then the voice came, a whisper, soft, cold, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't have come this way," I screamed. The car swerved. I yanked the wheel, barely keeping control. My pulse was a hammer in my skull, my breath ragged. Then up ahead, tail lights, a car. Relief flooded through me. Someone else was here. Maybe they knew a way out. I slammed the horn, flashing my high beams. The car ahead didn't react. I sped up, pulling closer. But as I neared, a sick realization crept over me. The car ahead of me, it was my car. Same make, same model, same scratches on the bumper. The license plate, it was mine. I choked on my breath, hands shaking as I slammed the brakes. My car skidded to a stop. The vehicle ahead slowed too. Then its brake lights flickered and the driver's door opened. A figure stepped out, and I saw myself, standing there in the middle of the road. Same clothes, same face, but the eyes were hollow, empty. I couldn't move. My limbs were frozen, my mind screaming for me to run. But I just sat there, trapped in my own body as my reflection, the other me, took a step forward. Then another, until it was right at my window. A cold breath ghosted against the glass. You shouldn't have come this way. The last thing I remember was darkness swallowing me whole. I woke up in my car, parked on the side of a familiar highway. The sun was rising. Birds chirped in the distance. I checked my phone. It was 6:14 a.m. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? But when I glanced at my dashboard, my breath hitched. The odometer had changed. Mile 237. I never took night drives again. The last ride. Night drives had always been my escape. There was something peaceful about the empty roads stretching endlessly into the darkness, the soft hum of the engine beneath me, and the cool night air slipping through the cracked window. But that night, I learned that some roads are meant to be left alone. I had been driving for hours, my fingers tight around the steering wheel, my thoughts a tangled mess. It was past midnight and I was miles from anywhere, just the way I liked it. The two-lane highway was deserted, nothing but the occasional mile marker breaking the monotony of the asphalt. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness, the beams swallowing the road ahead. I was somewhere between nowhere and forgetfulness when I saw it. A hitchhiker. He stood on the side of the road, barely visible in the dim glow of my high beams. His clothes were tattered, and he held up a single thumb, an age-old signal of desperation. Normally, I wouldn't have stopped, but something about him made me hesitate. Maybe it was the loneliness of the road, the eerie emptiness of the night, or maybe it was the way he stood so still, as if he'd been waiting just for me. I slowed the car and rolled down the window slightly. "Where are you headed?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. He leaned down, peering into the car. His face was shadowed by the night, but I caught a glimpse of his eyes, dark, sunken, and empty. "Anywhere but here," he said. A chill ran down my spine, but before I could change my mind, he opened the passenger door and slid inside. The smell of damp earth and something metallic filled the car. "You sure you're okay?" I asked, pulling back onto the road. He nodded, staring straight ahead. "Just tired." I didn't push for conversation. Instead, I focused on the road, the silence stretching between us like a thick fog. The only sound was the soft hum of the tires against the pavement. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. The road was endless, twisting through the woods, the trees looming like silent spectators. The farther I drove, the more uneasy I felt. Something was wrong. Started small, just little things that didn't make sense. The radio crackled even though it was off. The air inside the car grew colder, despite the heater being on. And the hitchhiker, he didn't move. He didn't fidget, didn't breathe heavily, didn't shift in his seat like most passengers would. He just sat there, rigid, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Then, I noticed something even stranger. The mile markers. I had passed the same one 3 times now. Mile 237. Each time, the number remained unchanged, as if I was driving in a loop. My stomach twisted. That wasn't possible. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the creeping dread. "We must be going in circles," I muttered. The hitchhiker turned his head slowly. "No, we're not." His voice was flat, emotionless. A shiver crawled down my spine. I pressed harder on the gas. The car sped forward, but the road stretched on, endless and unchanging. And then the headlights flickered. For the briefest second, the world outside plunged into darkness. When they came back on, my hands tightened on the wheel. The trees had changed. Before, they had been tall and sparse. Now, they were twisted, gnarled things, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering. "Where are we?" I whispered. The hitchhiker smiled. It was the first time he had moved since getting in the car, and it made my skin crawl. "We're still on the road," he said. The headlights flickered again. This time, I saw something in the rearview mirror. A figure, pale and hollow-eyed, sitting in the back seat. I slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, the car skidding to a halt in the middle of the road. My breath came in ragged gasps as I turned in my seat. The back was empty. The hitchhiker watched me, his expression unreadable. "You saw it, didn't you?" I licked my lips, my mouth dry. "What the hell is going on?" "You should have kept driving." His voice sent ice through my veins. I reached for the door handle. I needed to get out. I didn't care if I was in the middle of nowhere. I would rather walk than spend another second in that car. But before I could move, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was ice cold. "You can't leave," he said. "Not yet." I tried to yank my arm away, but his fingers dug in like iron. My vision swam, my breath coming in short gasps. Then the lights flickered again, and suddenly we weren't on the road anymore. The car was still moving, but outside the windows there was nothing. No trees, no sky, no road. Just a vast, endless blackness stretching in every direction. The car's engine whined as if struggling against something unseen. I turned to the hitchhiker, my voice shaking. "What is this?" His face was different now. The skin sagged, his eyes darker, hollow. He looked less human. "You shouldn't have stopped," he said. I slammed my foot on the brake, but the car didn't stop. Kept moving, gliding through the black void as if the road still existed. The speedometer spun wildly, numbers climbing into the impossible. "Let me out," I screamed. The hitchhiker only smiled, and then the car plunged. I don't know how else to describe it. It felt like the road beneath us disappeared, and we were falling, plummeting through an abyss without end. My stomach lurched, my ears popped, and the wind howled around us. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable impact, but it never came. When I opened my eyes again, I was sitting in my car, parked on the side of the road. The engine was off. The passenger seat was empty. I gasped for air, my heart slamming against my ribs. The night was still, the road ahead stretching into the distance like it always had. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking. 3:14 a.m. Had I dreamed it? But then I saw it. The scratches on my wrist. Long, thin marks where the hitchhiker had grabbed me. I threw the car into drive and sped off, never once looking in the rearview mirror. I don't know where I went that night, what road I ended up on, or how I got back. But I do know one thing. I'll never stop for a hitchhiker again.